Hello, I'm Sam.
I'm Carsey.
And I'm Derek.
And this is Unpacking Homelessness, the podcast where we take a deep dive into the issues surrounding homelessness in our communities. Let's get into it.
There you go. Hi.
Steve.
Hey, Steve.
This is Steve Johnson. Officer Johnson has served as a peace officer in Washington State for 25 years and is deeply committed to supporting his fellow responders. He plays an active role in his department's peer support team and is currently pursuing licensure as a substance use disorder professional. After retiring from law enforcement, he hopes to continue serving by working with first responders facing trauma and substance use challenges. Steve lives in Kent, Washington with his beautiful family. Steve, welcome to the show.
That's good to be here.
It's great to have
Welcome,
you.
Steve.
Great to see you again.
Nice to see you guys.
So, Steve, when reading through your bio, I thought that was really interesting that you are so big into supporting your peers in the department.
I had some very kind people help me about, let's say 5.5 years ago. At that point, I had about 20 years working, and I'm not afraid to say it. I let the cumulative stress get to me. I was not connected to my family in the way that I should have been. I was drinking too much, and I do feel strongly about peer support because it was because of the way that my friends at work helped me when I was not in a capacity to help myself, that they were able to intervene and get me the help that I needed. And so it's just passing along to the next generation. So it was a very unexpected thing that happened to me and my family, but because of that, it's opened up some really amazing doors, both professionally and in my personal life and other things. So it's been a wild ride the last 5-6 years, but life is healthy and good and connected, and yeah, things are good.
That's amazing. You're really such a testament to what it can look like when you can push through those really hard times.
Yeah, and we have an interesting career because, and if I misquote some of this information, I'll apologize after the fact, but our state recognizes that first responders, if you serve more than 10 years, it's presumptive that you have post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
And it's written into our state law. Our Department of Labor and Industries recognize that it's an injury that we have. Some of us do manage it better than others, and some folks never need help. I was one of those statistics that needed help. I'm grateful that the people helped me, and I wasn't. I had burned some pretty significant relationships up to that point, and they extended grace to me in a way that I knew I needed it, but I wasn't in a place to ask for it. So I'm very grateful that they did what they did.
That's actually really great that they have that planned kind of 10-year period. I imagine that everybody needs it, and you just had the strength to accept it.
Yeah, and there is more awareness now to just the idea of trauma. I think historically it was something that was reserved more for, people coming back, who might have been like military members, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of parallels between the exposures and the traumas and the high stress environments that we have to go into. There's obviously varying degrees, depending on where an officer or firefighter or EMS or even dispatchers are rolled into that too.
Mm-hmm.
Corrections, people that work in the prisons are connected to that too. So there's, like I said, varying degrees.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, most of my work up until the last about 6-7 years, most of my work was at nighttime doing some pretty stressful nighttime DUI enforcement. So I was, always running and gunning and getting in pursuits and getting a lot of fights with drunk drivers, and so it really added up quickly. And I'm grateful for that chapter in my life, but I wouldn't want to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
Fair enough.
When you talk about the traumas that are just, it's just part of the job, basically, is you're going to be traumatized at some point, right? And I wonder, does having that sort of understanding of pain, essentially, right? And that's, I mean, that's sort of the meat of it. Does that help you empathize with the people who you're serving, who are maybe going through different types of traumas?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yes, it does. And um, as you mentioned in the intro bio, I'm in college right now to get my license, my counseling license. And one of the videos that I watched this morning, you may have heard of this person named Gabor Mate. He's a brilliant human being. It's fair to say he's a doctor. I don't. He's got an amazing resume. You talk about trauma. If I remember his bio correctly, so he is from Hungary. Both his parents were killed in the Jewish concentration camps, and his life took an amazing journey, and he ended up working as I think a physician in a really, really rough area of East Vancouver. I've actually been there. I did some traveling in college, and it is some of those urban areas up there are really, really dangerous, filled with drug activity. And he mentions in his video that no one wakes up one morning and says, "I want to be a drug addict." Like no one makes that their hey, by dinner tonight I'm gonna be hooked on heroin, like, or opium,
Right.
whatever. And so he mentioned in this video how most of the clients or patients that he worked with overwhelmingly were victimized as children, and so because of that they were coping with their traumas and they sought out ways to heal their pain. And so I mean, to your point, I mean, I think I do have a greater appreciation or empathy for somebody when I do come across someone who is struggling with substances, and that is a big piece of the homeless population that we have. I mean, it's exceptionally rare if we ever did come across someone who was clean and sober. Then they exist,
Mm-hmm.
but that has not been my experience. I mean, my experience has been the overwhelming majority of these folks are they're hooked on now is fentanyl. That's
Mm-hmm.
easily the soup du jour, as they say. And that the drug trends, of course, always ebb and flow. It's kind of trickling back into the meth world a little bit now, but addiction is a fickle thing. I I have yet to meet someone who either isn't in recovery themselves or has a loved one in recovery or knows someone in recovery, and it's it's deeply personal to the people who are going through it. And I want to believe I've got a little bit of a softer approach now, because by the grace of God, I managed to get my stuff in check because of some very loving people. So
Yeah, actually, Steve, I watched one of your videos. I think it was through King 5, if I remember right. It was cleaning up an encampment, and it was a powerful video. And there's a few takeaways that I got from that. One of them was the amount of notice that you give people who are in these homeless encampments of there's going to be a sweep. And so, can you kind of walk us through what a normal process is like for sweeping a homeless encampment?
yeah, and I just want to make sure I'm referencing the right video. Is that the one where our undersheriff and I were kind of walking through the camp, Jesse Anderson? Yeah. So
Yeah, yeah.
is that camp? And Derek, forgive me. I know your other two co-hosts are from Seattle. Are you also from Seattle?
Funnily enough, yes, we are all in Greater Denver now, but I grew up towards the Canadian border, Marysville, and lived
Oh,
throughout
okay.
Seattle and King County, Snohomish County, a few different spots.
Yeah. So I mean, ironically, that camp it's gone now because of some of the work that we did, and we played a very small piece of that cleanup. It wasn't exclusively us, and I mean us as in the sheriff's office. It was a very multifaceted project. The city of Seattle has or had a very large homeless camp just kind of south of south of downtown. It's called the Jungle, and it is to a certain extent. There's still pieces of it that are still there, I believe. I've never worked it, but our version of the Jungle was the camp that you're talking about. I've had a chance to go through and work different homeless camps, but the one that you mentioned or that you saw probably in that video, that was without a doubt the most labor intensive and the biggest one that we've ever had to deal with. It was hot potato to me. um, and I learned a lot through that project. So the approach that I elected to take in a lot of the work we did down there, it was based on a lot of the past practices that maybe the city of Seattle had done prior to that point. A lot of it was us figuring it out as we went. I mean, there weren't a lot of hard concrete laws to fall back on. There were some evolving court cases that were happening. And so we were very cautious of our approach. And so we did take a very slow approach to anything that we did. So in terms of notice, we never did anything in those camps or that camp specifically by surprise. We always told people like, hey, coming up in a couple of weeks, we are going to be cleaning the road, or maybe there's a chunk of the woods that's going to get cleaned out. And the different, I guess you could call them interventions, were done for various reasons, right? Some of them were done with maybe less notice than others, but most of the time we gave the people there more than enough time to either move or to elect to leave completely. And it was done through not only posting of like signs and, banners or plaque, literally pieces of like laminated paper and plastic on trees. Like we go through with, staple guns and zip tie them to branches or whatever. But we'd tell them, like, hey, on this date, you can't be here, and then depending on what phase of the process we were at, sometimes they were allowed to come back. Other times they weren't. And so we made sure that we always had resources offered to them before any movement we ever did. And I can say that confidently that we never displaced anyone before they were given numerous opportunities to seek emergency shelter, which generally could transition into, longer term housing options.
Do they form organically as like a rebellion against those places, or do you see that they form because there's nowhere else to go?
So I would say a little bit of yes to all that you said. I do think, though, I want to be really careful I say some of these things because there's a very popular phrase that made its way through the media a couple of years ago called, my lived experience. Well, I will speak to mine. Sure. So my lived experience with working these camps has been that overwhelmingly, actually, I'd say almost everyone who has had to seek, shelter in whether it's a cold weather shelter or like in the summertime, we do have hot summers sometimes, they'll give them like cooling shelters. There's rules, like you said, that, hey, you can't do fentanyl in the shelter, or, you can't cohabitate with your partners because they're generally gendered, right? So like, male shelters only, or a lot of times it's adults only, or there's shelters just for kids, or so it's very, there are categories, if you will, right? I don't know of camps that were formed like in response or like rebellion, as you put it, but I can say that they do form organically, and they do form as little communities, because most of the people in these camps know one another, and they seek, because that's a measure of safety too. If you know somebody, you're gonna cohabitate next to where somebody, right? So I was presenting at a community event. It was last week, and I was asked a really similar question about that. The best example I could give that person who asked it was these camps are truly everywhere, and they're in your backyard, and it's surprising how well they're hidden, and they are transient by definition, right? I mean, they move where they can get access to stuff, right? I mean, whether it is, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The majority of these folks survive through stealing things. The overwhelming majority do. And that is evident by when we do these camps, these cleanups. I mean, I can't tell you how many truckloads and dump trucks full of garbage and stolen property that we recover after we clean up these camps. So is a lot of that out of necessity of survival? Yes, it is. But at the same time, though, it's been very rare when there's been a time where there was someone who wanted help and we couldn't get them because it was like a lack of resources. Mm-hmm. There has been, man, I wish I had some current numbers for you. I know that there was a report that came out about 6 months ago for the West Coast. And I mean, the amount of money that we have thrown at this problem, it's bonkers. Bonkers. And my county just gave several $1 million, like a lot, to the regional homeless authority, to support some of these efforts, right? These cleanups. So my response to that is, well, it's not gotten better. Mm-hmm. It's only gotten worse. And so I don't, and I don't want to mischaracterize kind of what I've done. I've only been working these homeless camps, I would say 5 to 6 years, maybe as kind of like a full-time thing. Definitely. I mean, even as early in like when I first started doing this out of college, you would see, we've all seen people at the ends of, freeway off ramps holding signs saying, hey, I need, whatever, I need this, I need money. Those back then, and I would say back in the late 90s, were more rare. And, we used to get calls to 911 about like, hey, there's people call them all kinds of things, transients, panhandlers, all kinds of unsavory names I can't say. And it used to be more accepted to kind of like move them along, right? Well, they're going to go somewhere. I mean, they're people.
Yeah.
Right. They're humans. And so, I mean, yes, there are people who in these camps have legal problems, 100%. I mean, and yes, the majority of them have outstanding warrants. They have crimes they've committed and they're trying to dodge those things. I completely get that. But a lot of them are just struggling with their stuff, their substance use, their unresolved traumas. It is a damaged population of people.
Well, if you've been doing the more of the cleanup, the encampment and cleanup stuff in the last 5-6 years, that's really in the rise of the fentanyl issue and fentanyl being so accessible, so affordable. I mean, that really changes what maybe homelessness or what these encampments looked like, a decade or two ago. The reasons seem a little bit different. What's perpetuating homelessness seems to be evolving. Yeah.
And I'm sure how police officers have to address that changes.
Sure,
I'm sure a population on meth is very different than a population on other drugs. And so your tactics have to sort of adapt.
Yeah. I mean, like if you think about it, there was a time where homelessness was on the rise because the war had ended and people were just simply displaced when they came back to the States. Some people may have got tickets for housing, whereas other communities, like communities of color and what have you, did not get those same rights when they came back from serving. And so that's obviously going to look like a very different problem to address. I'm sure if you handed people from that generation a meal ticket to a shelter or a home, they would gladly accept it. Whereas now it does seem to be that the desire to maybe do drugs and the traumas that people are dealing with are different.
No, I mean, you guys both bring up really good points that, so at this community meeting that I referenced earlier, and this was in I could say the name of the city. It's okay. It was in the city of Maple Valley. It was a community, kind of a town hall forum, if you will. At a break, some very, very concerned people came up because I was presenting about homelessness, and I showed this kind of a slideshow, a collection of photographs I've taken over, the last 6-7 years of the things I encounter at my job, and some of them are not easy to look at. They're very hard pictures, and I don't sugarcoat this issue when I'm presenting about it because it's not safe many times, and it's people who have abandoned hygiene years ago. It's wild. And they asked about, what the change has been. Like you kind of mentioned the last 6-7 years. Without a doubt, it's fentanyl. I mean, it is a drug issue coupled with all the other things that were already there too. But yeah, the addiction to opiates, it's different. It's and also you mentioned, this idea of coming back from the war, getting a meal ticket and those things like that. Once again, my lived experience working these camps has been that the number of times that I've gone to these camps with social workers to make sure they're safe. And once, we kind of make sure that everyone's copacetic and no one's going to do anything crazy, I just simply back off and hang out in the periphery and let them engage, right? And let them do their magic. Overwhelmingly, their offers of help are refused, and it's the whole spectrum of, like, we've got emergency shelter, we've got drug treatment, we have, even housing, for a night or two, right? And most of the social workers that I work with, I mean, they themselves were homeless at one point. So they have that shared experience. They know how to engage in a way that, like, I can't relate to that. I can relate to some other things, but I can't relate to being homeless. I've had a very lucky life that way. But it's a very odd thing when you see someone who is living in absolute destitute squalor. And we've got a team of people who show empathy and love and compassion, and they's like, we will take you right now. And then the answer is no. And it just makes me wonder, like, wow, like what is going on in that person's life at that moment, and then maybe preceding that moment for years before that, where they just can't bring themselves to be vulnerable and, like, step out into something new and, kind of step into the unknown, right? Because I get it. Like, if all is the little community you're living in these camps, which many times are exceptionally unsafe anyway, it's doing something new like that it's scary.
Yeah, I guess on that note, so you mentioned the very high amount of money that is being poured into this issue.
Mm-hmm.
And what we've been hearing is that it's not from a lack of resources. There are a lot of resources out there. I guess, can you shed some more light on what resources are out there that people continuously say no to?
Yeah, so in our area, we've got something, and I'm just going to state a fact. It's not like I'm rendering an opinion on it, but we have this thing. It's called the King County Regional Homeless Authority, and it's an independent agency that, to my understanding, receives funding from various, municipalities. I think it's actually multiple counties contribute to it. I'm sure there's other funding sources as well. And they are the kind of like the clearinghouse or the organizer of a lot of services. So my understanding is different social service providers will receive funding through them, and then they are the ones that go out and do the actual outreach. And I will say a couple of social groups that I work with that I've had very good relationships. I have had very good relationships with. There's a group within the Salvation Army called Street Level, which is amazing. Give a little nod to Will and Tina and Patty and all the rest. And also there's a group called the Recovery Navigator Team, which is based on the other side of the valley from where I'm sitting now. Nikki and her crews, they're amazing folks. And every time they've gone out into the field with me or other of my coworkers, if someone has ever needed a place to go, they'll get them a place to go. And when I mean a place to go, it's not just the emergency shelter for the night or two. It's, hey, we will then start a relationship with you. I mean, case management or whatever you want to call it, but they start a relationship and they check in with that person and they say, okay, let's get you some job training. Let's get you a new set of clothes. Like, do you need ID? Let's work with the Department of Licensing and get your license. Do you need help filing, taxes or whatever? Like, just basic stuff that they have been unable to do. And they will literally walk alongside that person. A couple of times I've actually seen some of those people I mentioned go to the local licensing office and, like, walk in with them and help them get a driver's license or an ID card, right? So they have been more than gracious, more than accommodating to support these people. But many of them, overwhelmingly, most of them just say, like, I'm not ready.
With not being ready, let me ask you this. So how much of that do you think is related to the substance use? The inability to maybe think clearly or think critically. Is that part of the problem of why people are saying no?
So I want to say this, that I will never try to presume or I mean, it'd be arrogant of me to sit here, in my, my front porch on a nice sunny day where I've got food in the fridge and, I've got everything I need. Right. Sure. And so I have a very privileged life. I don't know how to answer your question other than I'm going to go back to something I've seen. I can't just countless amounts of times when the social workers show up and it looks like change is coming. So what I mean by that is, like, change could be the hired contractors are going to come in and actually clear the camp out, or that person's homeless camp is not going to be allowed to remain there because of like maybe and we've had many of these camps are along the banks of rivers, and the person's told like you can't stay there, like that's actually dangerous, you actually could get swept down a river, or we've had high fire danger in the past. So like there's reasons why these camps can't remain, right? And so most of the time when a deadline is looming, if someone is struggling with substance use, they use almost right in front of us just to cope with the stress of what's happening to them in that moment. So that to me now says, well, why is that person having to use? Yes, most of these folks are probably addicted. I get it. But why in that moment did the idea of someone coming and maybe offering you help, what did that trigger in you that you felt a need to use? And that's exceptionally common. And then of course it's hard to engage with somebody, when they're, especially when they do meth, it's like, good luck communicating, right? Or if they fall asleep from fentanyl.
I just can't help but think how tragic it is that the life that they're living feels like a better option than
Right.
what the alternative is. I just can't even imagine that pain to feel like I'd rather stay where I am in this state of discomfort and cold and hunger and isolation and drug use and stress and like then see what's behind the door. I mean, that's so indicative of the pain that a lot of people are in.
So it's making me sad because the last, not the camp that we referenced earlier, but there was another one, a much smaller cleanup, but we still removed, I think about 20 yards of garbage, until I think it was like a couple dump trucks full. Actually, we removed the garbage out of this camp. There was snow on the ground. It was actively snowing one morning, and the people in the tents I couldn't see them doing, smoking fentanyl in front of me, but I could tell by the way they came out of their tents, they had just used, it was very obvious. But you're right. They made a conscious decision, despite having social workers right there with us, knowing that we were going to give them, we got approval to, turn a blind eye to maybe some of their like low level warrants, just for the sake of them, like, hey, if you're willing to accept help, like to get you into a shelter situation, like you can go right now. And most of them said no, and they went walking down the trail, and we never saw them again. And it's super sad. It is heartbreaking to see that someone is feeling so isolated and so alone that this is the only comfort they know is this. And it's not even comfort. It's the opposite of connection is addiction. And these people are not connected. They think they are with the little people, next to them in their tents, but that's not connection. That's active use. So, I would never presume to know what the individual situation is, but it's very obvious that drug use runs rampant in these camps. Alcohol is rare. It's all fentanyl and meth.
It feels like a little bit of a chicken or the egg situation. Are they using drugs and becoming addicted and then becoming homeless? Or are a lot of people homeless and because they're exposed to it and they're in this situation that maybe
self-medicating.
exactly. So, and once they're in it, I imagine it's hard to get out of it.
Yeah, that analogy, the chicken and the egg, that's a great way of summing it up. I don't. Once again, I'm gonna kind of refer back to that video I watched for my college course here recently. That, no one wakes up in the morning and goes, "I want to be a drug addict." So they're coping with something, and yeah, there absolutely is a moment where maybe they become physically addicted, and then that's the only. That's the only piece they can get is if they have that moment of that momentary high, right, where they're just checked out from the world. There was a moment, and I will have to speak in very general terms about this because it's rooted in politics, but we had a staffer. And I'm going to jump back to that large homeless camp that you guys watched the video on. We had one of the staffers from the county come through that camp with us. And, he made a comment to myself and a couple other people that were there that his boss had in fact walked through this camp, had seen it for himself. And I've got a pretty level head when it comes to work stuff. Like I know, like when I'm wearing my uniform, I've got to be very level headed. I snapped at this kid. I snapped because I was so, I mean, didn't lose like my professional demeanor, but like I was pretty hot. And I told this kid, I said, how dare you say, it's insulting, first of all, for you to say that your boss saw this. First of all, which I know is just a categorical lie, that his boss had not come down there. But I said, if your boss really had come down here, how in the world could he have seen this and not been called to action? It's not the stuff that we see in these camps. It's not a red thing, a blue thing, a conservative. It's not. I don't care who you are. If you see these camps and it doesn't stir your heart, you're a cold-hearted bastard. These are people's children, and these are people's brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers. And like, I get it that, yeah, we are always held accountable for the decisions we make. And many of these people have legal stuff that I have to intervene on. I totally get that. But how you can forget that there's a human element to this is just, it's mind blowing to me. These people are not garbage. They're not.
Well, Steve, let me ask you this. So, you've alluded in the past to the hammer and the nail approach. Can you talk about what that means and why it is or isn't working?
So I've learned that the many successes that we have had have come through relationships and without me or my coworkers flexing our authority.
More of a compassion-driven approach rather than going in with the authority.
Yeah, I mean, these guys and gals know, and I'm going to keep kind of going back to the big homeless camp that I mentioned earlier. They know us. They could they could literally see. And I typically have driven an unmarked truck for several years now. They knew my truck the moment it crested the hill. I mean, they knew me, right? So I would make no attempt to hide who I was. They would often call me Officer Steve, which I'm fine with. I don't care. That's cool. It works. And it's wild, like the amount of information we would get out of those camps unsolicited. They would come to us. It is, and this is not to minimize them or like portray that I'm belittling them. So I'm not. But it was like watching like a school teacher gets like a kid who runs in like all excited about like something they like homework they're all proud of. Right? Like myself and this one other officer, and I'll say his name, Joe Winters. We worked together a long time, and these folks would often come and like want to tell us stuff. Like they would want to engage us. And I want to believe that came from a place where I want to believe that we treated them with respect. I mean, and there were times like, yeah, we had to go and arrest these folks because that's a big piece of our job sometimes. But it's like for every time that we did a legal intervention like that, there were probably, I'd say 10 other times where we just went in and spoke with them, and we learned about like the goings on of what was happening in that region. And we got some pretty wild information that solved some pretty crazy crimes just because they wanted to engage us. It's not hard to treat somebody like a human being. there's no magic sauce. You just show up and, treat them like you want to be treated. It's not hard, and
you made a comment before in our first conversation that when you can remember somebody's name and speak to them and maybe touch even on something that you remember that they told you about themselves, and you can kind of build that relationship with them and just show that you just care, and how people can respond so openly to somebody just caring about them. And do you find that increases the number of people who are willing to accept those services? And is that the measurement is that what you would say is success? Or what do you describe success as?
So in some of the pre-planning meetings that we did on some of these homeless camp cleanups, we would often be asked by groups outside of the county for numbers, metrics. They want to know concrete numbers, right?
Sure.
And we would do our best to try to produce those numbers. But as I kind of mentioned earlier, many times this population does not sit still. I mean, they're coming and going. They're going to their methadone. They're going to their jobs. They They get in a spat with their person they're occupying a space with, and sometimes they just flat leave. It's a very hard it's a hard population to assess. So it's funny. That's a really good question. I would not measure a success or a win by like getting someone out of those camps. Like I've never looked at it that way. Like, and that's never been like my mindset. I've never thought like we were in there to like rescue them or something. That's not our role, right? That's not what we're there for. So man, I'm not sure if you've heard of this guy. There's a Catholic priest in LA named Father Boyle.
Heard the name.
Oh man, you want a tearjerker? Listen to this guy talk. He's written several books, but he has formed an organization back, I believe, in probably the late '80s, and it's called Homeboy Industries. And what he does is he effectively works with he affectionately calls them his homies, right? Gang members, right? And man, the wisdom it's. I just listened to one of his podcasts last night, so it's fresh in my mind. The measure of empathy that he extends to those folks. I mean, like what he has often said, people have called his homies like undesirables, like untouchables, right? Like, well, that's not, no one deserves that label. So I guess to me, I mean, this is just me talking. I would think a success would be if someone is just kind of reminded of their dignity in a brief interaction we've had with them.
That is such a beautiful answer. Truly.
I will give full credit to my mother-in-law. Okay. She'll laugh if she's watching this. So she works with this organization in our region called Kent Hope, and it predominantly works with women and children. And it's connected to the Union Gospel Mission, a few other things. But that name trick that I mentioned, that's all her. She shared that with me over dinner one time. We're over having a meal at their home, and she told me that when she brings soup and food to some of the men and women down in the valley, I mean, she tries to remember some of their names. And it's a small thing, right? But these folks have been pigeonholed to believe that they don't have value and dignity, and that's just flat wrong. It's wrong.
And restoring some dignity is bringing peace to the community wherever they are. If you can go into a homeless encampment and individually restore a little bit of dignity, or like you said, give people that moment of feeling seen and just making their day a little bit better, you're bringing a little bit more peace to that community. So maybe it's not really a matter of where they're at and making sure they have the resources and that they're going through the system. Maybe it's just wherever they are, reducing crime and increasing peace and harmony.
It's like working at the root cause of the pain instead of just the surface level stuff of like, well, here's the things you need to not die, like.
And there's a really different philosophy among the different social workers who go out and engage in these camps, right? And I've seen the way that the different groups approach these folks, and it's funny. Some of them are very quick to, give a blanket or a tent or a whatever, and you hear that, and you're like, oh, that's a great thing, right? Well, I struggle with that because I walk to that same camp a week later. It's knee deep in mud and it's been forgotten about, right? The groups that seem to have the most success, instead of giving things out, they just show up and they become a trusted person that if that day ever comes, then they can get on their cell phone, and all these folks have cell phones. It's a wild phenomenon. They will call the different social workers and like, all right, I'm ready. And it doesn't happen often. It really doesn't. But I feel like those wins, I guess, those successes, that's the magic sauce. As we were talking about this, I'm not going to say this one person's name, but I've known her probably going on close to a decade now. And I've watched her kind of go up and down. And, I saw, actually, it really caught me off guard. I saw a picture of her when she was talking to one of the Salvation Army street level workers. And it was probably from 2 or 3 years ago. And she looked healthy. Like she looked like normal weight. But I saw her in real life about a week ago out where she's currently living with her boyfriend, and man, she's just like skin and bones. And I don't know if she's ever going to get out of her situation. I don't know. I mean, who knows if she ever will, but it was, I don't know what I've done to deserve it. But as I was out doing some work, this is a couple months ago, out in her general area. I mean, she and her boyfriend drove by, and they both got bad driver's licenses, so they shouldn't have been driving. So I was kind of laughing to myself. But she waved at me, like she waved as she went by in the car, and I'm gonna chew her and her boyfriend for driving when I see him next time. But it's like, I don't know. We've overcomplicated so many of these conversations around this stuff, and I just think that we could get some traction if we just got back to some of the basics.
What type of basics?
Well, I mean, it's not humane to let people live like this.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I walked into my kids' rooms, and yes, I've got 3 teenagers, so many of their rooms probably look like this right now, but it's like I wouldn't let my kids live like this. But for some reason, because of various politics and it's become permissible to say, okay, well, we're just gonna let this, like, we're gonna like let the social workers come and engage them, and if they can say no, it's okay. Like, no, to me, like, the humane thing would be, if I saw someone living in these conditions, I'd say, I'm sorry, you're not living a life that's suitable for human existence. Like, I feel there has to be a way for us, the ones who are able to advocate, and say, you know what, I'm sorry, I'm going to suspend some of your civil liberties for a moment, and you're going to get sent to the hospital, and you're going to get involuntarily placed into a place where you can't live like this. And I know that's not a popular thing to say because, civil rights, and I get all that stuff, but these camps are gross.
You're not the first person we've spoken to that has had that theory of almost forcing intervention in a sort of sense, or saying, hey, we're going to take away some of your rights temporarily, put you in institution of some sort, and rehabilitate, like maybe restructure some of your social skills or whatever it is. You mentioned, Steve, in our first conversation as well, that was new to me, that's something that you can do when in somebody's home. You can go into somebody's home and declare it unfit.
Yeah. So in Washington State, we call it an ITA, or an Involuntary Treatment Act, where if we have some kind of encounter with somebody and they are living a life that, it's not healthy, and they are in grave danger of, hurt themselves, and we can temporarily, send them to the hospital and get evaluated by the social workers. So I don't know why a situation couldn't be. I mean, I know, just like thinking about it, I think if there's another first responder, listening to this, they're probably going to say, like, well, we could involve someone, right? Well, we all know that they get to the emergency room, they would get evaluated by a social worker or a nurse. Well, they're not life threatening, and they'll get booted door in an hour, and they'll be back in that same camp again. So there has to be a stopgap where, instead of just sending them to the hospital, instead no, you're not going to be allowed to go back there, and not make it punitive, not, put him in jail necessarily, but there has to be a way. And like, what we're doing is, it's not right to allow them to live like this.
Well, yeah, it is kind of funny that you have those rules and regulations for those if they're living in a house. The same sentiment does not apply if it's not inside of a house. So is it a matter of switching the laws? What would you say in that situation?
Well, yeah, and I want to not be stuck on this idea, like, well, we can only do it if it's in somebody's house. If law enforcement interacts with somebody, and whether it's in someone's home or, in a public setting, if they are living in a way that is dangerous to themselves or others, we have that legal authority. We can do that, right? Okay. I don't want to give a specific example, but yeah, I've done it a couple of times recently, where someone was in such bad medical decline that I'm like, no, you're going to the hospital. But there's nothing preventing them, once they get stable, from just going right on back to that same camp again. Right. And that's where the problem is. We should be able to say, check a box on the mental health form that we fill out, and say this person was living in absolute squalor in a homeless camp. We need to make sure that before they get released again, like they have been set up with something. And if it's determined that they're just going to keep repeating the cycle over and over again, there has to be a different solution. Maybe it is we send them somewhere that they can't. I don't want to make it sound like I'm suggesting we send them to like an internment camp. That's wrong. But it's like, I don't like, there has to be something like that, like a supportive place where they can go, address their mental health, address their drug stuff, address these things. Because there was, and I can't speak about this, there in this homeless camp, the big one, there was a lady who made an intentional choice to come to this camp and live there. She had a house, and something had happened, like some switch went off in her head, and she felt like that was just the place she needed to be. And she had an actual home with a family. She had a raging drug addiction too, which I'm sure is a huge piece of it. But a lot of these folks just they can't advocate for themselves.
Yeah, that's a slippery slope where you're taking away civil liberties, and somebody who can't think critically, think for themselves, and where's that line? Where's that line in the sand where here's where it's appropriate, here's where it's not?
Yeah, I mean, there's no easy fix to this because a lot of this stuff, it's not criminal in nature. I mean, yes, a lot of these folks are trafficking stolen property they're doing that stuff too. But yeah, just living in the woods in unsanitary conditions, like a lot of that's not a crime. But, it's gotten so rampant that, yeah, we do need some different authority, some other laws. And it may not be best to have them be facilitated through law enforcement. Maybe it should come through somebody else. And I'm fine with that. But if the end result is these people get help and they're not allowed to live like this, I mean, just our communities are going to be better. The people will be better. This is a real story. I took from a mother who called 911, got a tip that her missing son, who is an adult, and so he's able to make his free choices. He was homeless, living somewhere in a homeless camp, and had a really bad medical thing. And she just was begging and pleading for help to go find him. And I told her, I said, I don't even know where to begin. Like, there are hundreds of these camps everywhere, and on top of that, I said, ma'am, there's no law preventing him from doing what he's doing. And I could just hear, like, in the tone of her voice, how sad she was, because she's like, I just want to help my son. And I told her, I said, I've got 4 kids myself. Like, I get that, but.
Man, that is so tough.
Yeah. And as a parent yourself, as you just mentioned, it's like when your children are, in this world, and I'm sure a lot of these people are young. I mean, they're young enough to have not really even started living yet. And they're already, and this is their life, and they're in their young 20s and hopeless, I imagine, a lot of them. That must be so heartbreaking as a parent to feel like there's really not a lot you can do.
It's probably hard for Steve to feel like there's not a lot that he can do. I imagine.
I'm sure. Yeah.
There's not a lot that you can do to help these parents that are coming to you asking for help.
Yeah.
There was another, and this is a different family, different mother, or a different parent. I mean, and I didn't say a lot to this point, but I mean, no surprise, there's a lot of human trafficking and prostitution that goes in these camps. There is. And there was a mother not too far from that large homeless camp that would routinely call us and ask for help trying to find her daughter, who she believed was prostituting herself in the camps. And, she would send me updated pictures that she would find on social media. And I told her, I'm like, I'll keep an eye out for her, but
she's an adult.
Yeah, she's an adult. And it's heartbreaking when you got a parent that just wants their child, and granted, this woman was 18 or 19 years old, the one that was living in the camps. But I did unfortunately have to tell this one mom, I said, hey, the last time I talked to your daughter, she didn't want help, so, there are, I've only mentioned, 2 of these specific stories, but I mean, there are all these people have families, or most have families. They have somebody in their life that they either, care about them or cared about them at one point. And
Yeah, you shared a story about one of somebody who was living, I forget how close, but a few blocks away from their house. They were homeless, but choosing to not go home and rather live a few blocks away.
yeah, that was the camp that I was referring to that we just cleaned out when it was snowing outside this last winter. And I didn't discover it, but my partner did, that, she was living under a bridge, probably, 2 blocks, maybe 3 away from her father's home. And when we learned of that, we both, my partner and I, tried to engage her in a conversation about like, hey, like what's going on? Like, why are you not able, and clearly she did not want to talk about it. So we're like, okay,
So she wasn't even kicked out. She was by choice. She had the option of going home.
I don't know. I don't know her backstory, but I mean, she had a real visceral response when we started kind of pressing her a little bit about like, hey, why can't you go home? And she did not want to talk about it. So, she and her boyfriend were an example of, they did not want to accept help. We had social workers there, an open car door willing to take them to a place to go while it was snowing. And they said, nope, we don't want it. And they literally got on this bike path, walking path, and just walked towards the nearest city, and we never saw them again.
So Steve, I have a question for you. I kind of have I don't know if it's a hypothesis or what, but I kind of wonder if, to tee this up, Washington State decriminalized certain drug possession. Is that correct? And then the 3 strikes law. There are some people we know that are sitting in jail or prison because of the 3 strikes. And with drugs being decriminalized, certain possession charges being decriminalized. Maybe you can speak to that because I'm not sure exactly how that works. But I imagine that draws an influx of transient, unhoused people who are choosing to do drugs over taking their state's resources or whatnot. I imagine that causes like an influx of those types of communities and people to states that are decriminalizing drugs and whatnot, which would clearly increase our number of unhoused people. And if a larger percentage of people are not taking the resources that we have available, does that jeopardize the grants and the funding that's given to these social service programs? So my hypothesis is that if we have 20,000 homeless people, then maybe services would get a grant based off of that large number of people that they need to shelter or to address. And so funds that are permitted when only a small percentage of those people are actually accepting the help, does that mean the next year that those services try to get those funds again? Does it jeopardize them getting those funds, or does it cut programs?
Yeah. Wow. There's a lot to unpack there. I would say that, so grants, obviously, in the experience that I've had with some grants that I've been connected to, I mean, we had to produce hard data, right, indicating that the grants were being applied, in the appropriate way. And, what was the result and a metric of success or not success. And so maybe we weren't awarded, the grant money the next time around. So you're right. I mean, the drug laws did change a lot. And I can't remember the specific time when it was. I want to say 3-4 years ago, roughly. So yeah, many drugs that were previously a felony are no longer a non-felony. They're still criminalized, but they're not to the extent that they were, the high level they were before. One of the driving forces behind that was the idea that if someone got arrested for a possession charge, using drugs in public, possession, things like that, assuming it wasn't like a huge, like a distribution level, like a personal level of consumption, right? The idea would be that they would be connected through drug treatment and other resources through the courts. And I believe it's something like, I think it's on the 3rd possession charge, you get like a mandatory referral, something like that. So the times that I have arrested people for drug possession in these camps, I've always made a note to the prosecutor in our paperwork, like, hey, this person would really benefit from some kind of drug treatment. there was an instance down in South Seattle. It was not that long ago where, and I mentioned I drive an unmarked truck. And so if you're not, if it's an area that I haven't historically worked, I mean, I can kind of go under the radar for a few moments before I, jump out of the truck when I'm wearing my uniform. And when I rolled up to this one area, someone was just clearly going to this tent to, score drugs. And then this lady was just openly using, I'm assuming she was smoking meth or fent right there in front of us. And, I ended up arresting her and charging her with the intent that she would get referred to services. Like that was the hope. And I could not speak to, like the efficacy of the grants or, what the grant funding, that's so far outside of what I do. I will say though, there was a noticeable change in what I perceived as the willingness of people to openly use drugs, where before the drug use in public, we would see it a little more. It's a little more guarded. People seem to turn their backs a little more to us now, and they kind of shelter, when they might be using in public. So they try to hide it a little more now. It seems like, knowing that we could arrest for it. Yeah, I mean it's. The without a doubt, the influence of the drug culture is a huge, very present factor in most of these things. Very much.
Well, Steve, let me ask you this: what's a common misconception that the public has of how police can interact with homeless versus what is real? What's actually going
on? I would say that. I'm very careful to not bash my neighboring police department, who I don't work for. But many times when we have gone into some of these camps, we often hear that some of the neighboring agencies take a very different, kind of a heavy-handed approach to their interactions with the people in the camps. And I just believe like you are going to get more done if you just extend a little more compassion right out of the gates. So I think there probably is a misunderstanding or a misconception from the public that all we want to do is we want to go in and arrest these people. No, I think actually most of us, and I'll speak just for me and my partners, like we actually want to try to work with them to try to get them in a better place so we don't have to continue to engage them all the time. I mean, any cop can arrest somebody. That's easy. Obviously, we have to find a crime, of course, but it does take a little more energy and a little more work to want to put forth the effort to try to get somebody help.
Well, and kind of like you said earlier, then maybe there's parts where it's not the police officer's responsibility in some cases, and bringing in the right partners. You did allude to something in your discovery call about people coming in with super clean shoes. Can you tell the clean shoes story of? I really like that.
Man.
The listeners would.
Oh boy, you really got a good one on that one. Okay,
yeah.
I'm not going to say what agency it was, but I had a very wise training officer early on. You always watch people's watching people's eyes is very important, body language and stuff. But my trainer also encouraged me to look at people's shoes, because you can tell a lot about people by their shoes. As I said earlier, these camps are gross. They're unsafe. I just bristle when I hear, someone call them like, well, they're just camping. No, this is not camping. What we're talking about here. This is anything but that. Mm-hmm. So this one particular agency, their representatives would come out, and many times they would come out of their cars, and their shoes, gleaming white shoes or clean, whatever they were, right? And it was just so clear that they had no intention of becoming involved. They didn't. I mean, I have to decon my boots every time I get out of these camps. I carry bottles and bottles of water, all kinds of chemicals to, sanitize them, whatever. Some days are more than the others, but yeah, it was comical to watch how awkward the members of this group were. The rare event that they would actually come out and work in these camps with us, and they always had a good excuse, why they couldn't stay longer, or how it was too traumatizing for their staff to come out and see these things. And I'm like, you guys are the ones supposed to be dealing with this stuff. And I'm not trying to suggest that they need to be the ones doing the heavy lifting and physically cleaning, but there's a reason why when you're learning a new skill or a profession, like you need to go do, like when EMTs are learning about medicine, like, or, basic first aid, they go do a round at a hospital, and they watch and they learn and observe. And I'll tell you that these people were tasked, I think, with being, facilitators of trying to fix some of these problems. And they didn't seem like they were very good assets in the field. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, when resources are going to that and it's not being efficient or even useful, it sounds like in some cases, I'm sure that's frustrating.
Yeah, so in terms of reallocation of funds or resources, that seems like a worthwhile have a position that's just teeing up these groups for what they can expect.
Yeah, I mean, there are some groups who seem to be very effective at getting people connected to help. Others struggle. This one church, this church does this safe parking program, and it's the parking lot is I'm not going to say it's always full because they have a limited number of participants in this program, but they just seem to be they're connecting in the right way. They're not just handing out, I'm not. There's no other way of sugarcoating it. They're not handing out trivial things like, hey, here's a $5 gift, gas card. Like, here, this will get you. No, that just moves the person down the road.
Mm-hmm.
That, I mean, literally moves them down the road. When you're just throwing things at people, you're not fixing their problem.
Yeah, it's like teach a man to fish, right?
Because women already know how to fish.
Yes, we do.
Right.
Steve, we're nearing the end of our conversation here, and you've given us so many things to think about and the perspectives that you've offered. You're so compassionate and heart-led, and to be someone in the position that you're in and be really guided by those outlooks that people deserve respect and they deserve dignity and they deserve to be seen as sentient humans and not a waste of space. It's a really beautiful outlook to have. And I, for one, am really grateful that there are people in positions of power like you who have that outlook and are leading with your heart. It's incredibly inspiring.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for serving your community the way you do. And thank you for kind of taking on that peer role and kind of ensuring that it gets passed on to the next generation and that it doesn't stop with you, because we do hope that you retire someday.
We'll definitely be interested
if you want to, we hope
with
that you get that. Yeah.
yeah, and hopefully we'll be able to get some local law enforcement from Colorado, our neck of the woods around Denver, and kind of see, compare and contrast. And we're trying to get a Facebook group off the ground. I don't personally have one, but if we had this going for Unpacking Homelessness, get some like-minded people and kind of share resources. We'd love to kind of do something like that down the road with this project.
Definitely.
Very cool. Well, I wish you guys luck. I mean, I'm grateful that, I could have this conversation with you. And I think anytime that there's a platform and we can have, I mean, this was a pleasant conversation. I didn't perceive it as a hard conversation, but these are hard topics, right? And
Sure.
We need to, these things are not going away. And I'm just going to briefly share that in this group that I presented at this last week, I told, this room full of people that, the county we live in it's the most populated county in Washington state.
Mm-hmm.
And after I presented my various pictures to them, I asked a lot of them, I said, where do you think these pictures were taken? And then I rolled back to one particular picture that was frankly one of the more gross pictures I had in my presentation. And I said, that one is about 1.5 miles up the road under that bridge. And I'm like, we can't put our head in the sand on this stuff. We can't. Like, we've got to find a responsible, comprehensive, and frankly, an ethical way of addressing these things. We have to.
Well said.
We just can't thank you enough for making the space for this conversation.
Thank
You're
you,
welcome.
Steve. This is great.
Yeah. It's such a pleasure to meet you. And I really hope that your knowledge and your insight gets passed on to more people in your field and in your role. I think there are a lot of negative stereotypes out there, especially right like during these times about police officers. And it's just so refreshing and it's so good to meet somebody firsthand and just know that that is just a stereotype and that there are good people out there serving. And I'm so glad you chose this profession. And I'm so glad you've taken the time to do introspection on yourself and question your own values and where you're at and how you're handling your own life and really kind of getting right with yourself so that you can show up even better for other people. You really are doing great work. And I hope to meet more people like you on this journey that we're on.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
All right. Have a great weekend with your beautiful family. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. Let's unpack that.
What an amazing man.
Yeah. He's incredible.
I think we got to give him a shout out for his use of let's unpack. Or Sam, you had a great long question, and he's like, "Oh, a lot to unpack there." And then
We're like,
Carsey, I saw your eyes light up, like unpack.
I know. Well, I am so curious
buzzword.
because, if you think about it, like I imagine if I was trying to get money for my service, my program, and I said, listen, there's 20,000 homeless people in this state. So I need this much money to help all of them. But, then 90% of them don't take that resource that I was allocated, then the next year I do imagine that it'd be much harder to either get the funds or to even keep my organization open. So it does like I think doing things like decriminalizing drugs. So actually I had kind of a perspective shift in that conversation because I'm very conflicted about the decriminalization of drugs. I think we've seen it really not work in Portland, and then we've seen it kind of work in other places as far as well, Carsey, our mom, she works kind of on the front lines of that process. She works in the Blake unit, which is, she's finding people who are currently sitting in prisons and in jails for these possession charges and actively saying like, hey, you don't need to be there anymore, and she's helping them handle them through the process of getting released. And so there's that's reuniting families. That's giving people second chances. That's doing a lot of beautiful things. But with that said, I imagine it does pull a lot of people to places like Washington State or King County where they're like, oh, I can go hang out there and do fentanyl on the street and not get arrested. My perspective.
Well, and I think I was just going to say, so when it comes to what types of drugs, I think that does need to be a consideration too, because I've heard the same thing of meth and fentanyl. So decriminalizing when it comes to like weed or shrooms, it's a much different demographic than the others. But when it comes to pulling resources, the ability for people to think clearly, like I was saying, that's something I would like to talk to substance abuse officers on. What are the traits of people under the influence of different things, and does that come into play on their whether they reject resources or not?
Right. My perspective shift was when Steve said that he can arrest people for publicly doing drugs or whatnot. It's just that when they get to court, they might be presented with far more drug rehabilitation program options instead of just going right to jail. So that makes me feel better about it because that does seem to be like an opportunity for kind of enforcing social programs, which I know that doesn't sound great, but from the people that we've talked to, I do think we've talked to people from quite a few different that see things through a few different lenses at this point. And it does seem that I don't want to say forced institutionalization, but
involuntary.
Kind of maybe involuntary intervention is a better way to put it. Does seem necessary in a lot of cases.
Yeah. Well,
coming around to that too.
I think you can liken it to parenting a little bit. It's like, when your children are not in the position to make decisions that are best for them, you as a parent have the responsibility to make decisions on their behalf. Because you can sort of see from this higher perspective, you can kind of see the long-term repercussions and the implications of their decisions in the moment, right? And so, it does sound harsh to say, but I mean, I think ultimately, even if we drill down to the fact that, in Washington especially, we've really, I think, put a high price on free will and a high price on people being able to make their own decisions. And we've said this is what we value, and we think people should be able to decide what they want and decide how they want to live their lives. And it's not really it's not for us to say. But
And I get a lot of that logic, but at the
mhm.
same point, when somebody's personal choice bleeds into affecting other people too, I feel like that's a part that gets missed a lot. Of Sam, I think you were saying of when you're behaving in a way that affects other people. For I guess off the top of my head, it's the stealing, it's the hygiene, it's the safety. So I feel like you can live this way until it starts affecting other people, because we all want to have compassion. We want to have these resources and groups that can help them. But in terms of the involuntary part, I feel like that's when it should start coming into play more, when it's becoming a public safety
Mhm.
issue, and
Yeah.
just
I
give some
mean,
stipulations.
when you think about that, I thought that would be that could be a hairy line to draw, like
Mhm.
legally, to determine what is unsafe for the public and what is not. I mean, we don't need to get into this right now, but I can't help it.
Unpack it.
It makes me think about abortion rights, right? Because that's saying that, like, say somebody has, in most places we do, thank goodness, but like has access to getting an abortion when they feel that they need one for themselves.
Mhm.
Say somebody started kind of leaning on that system, or maybe even in a case where somebody might be abusing that system, and now
You're
they've
saying
had
like using it as birth control and not being
maybe
as
using it more as birth control, or maybe, I want to say this really delicately, but like multiple, like, what's the line, right? What's the
Yeah,
line of like giving people freedom and saying, hey, your body,
sure.
your choice, and then saying, hey, this is a lot of potential lives that might be getting affected by this. It can
Sure.
be, I think, when you're setting laws and you're making laws, you need to be able to point to and draw like a hard line. Like, even in the
Yes.
case of like um of it being like, well, weed and mushrooms are okay, but fentanyl and meth is not. Like, well, how do we what would be the
what's that
classification?
criteria?
Yes, and then we have to start classifying things and saying, okay, well, in this category, that's illegal, but in this category, it's not, because of the classification. And I think classifying things can get very, very dicey as well.
Hmm.
Sure, but it kind of needs to happen. You got to have that line in the sand where it's indisputable, and
Yes,
that's
yes.
where, you know, dang, we forgot to get into it with him on the progress, because it sounds like there's been a lot of progress in Washington
Oh,
on the
dang,
state
are
of
we gonna have to
homelessness.
have him back? Oh no.
But but yeah, I would have liked to hear about that. So, Car Sam and I were talking a little bit about how the Sam had a friend that just recently went to Seattle, and then they
Yeah,
said
last
that the
week.
last week.
Hmm.
Yeah, so it'd actually be good to hear their perspective. Rochelle told me that they built um, a walkway, a very large walkway
Pedestrian
to,
bridge, yeah.
where was it?
A pedestrian bridge.
A pedestrian bridge, yeah,
Hmm.
right around the downtown area, and just that project alone, cleaned up a lot of the surrounding areas that've been a lot better lately.
Hmm.
Yes, my coworker went to Seattle last week, and I asked him, it was his first time in Seattle, and I said, did you see a lot of homelessness, or like, I was kind of expecting him to be like, yeah, Seattle's crazy, because that's
Yeah.
always the feedback I get from
Yeah.
people who are visiting. And
Right.
he was like, no, it really wasn't bad. And I said, oh, did you drive the I-5 corridor like through Seattle? And he was like, yeah, we drove from SeaTac to Everett and on along I-5, and I didn't see
Hmm.
any encampments really. And I was like, huh? I was like,
Didn't believe
oh,
him.
that's interesting. Yeah, that seems like a rapid change, because I spoke to somebody who was there 2 months ago, and they were like, Seattle is intense.
Interesting.
Um,
I wonder what's
well, I think
changed.
maybe this pedestrian bridge going up kind of, whenever you're trying to attract people and trying to build the economy or something, or drive the economy, or get people on board with like a taxpayer decision, because that bridge is going to be built with taxpayer money, so it needs to get the approval of the taxpayers. So they're very much incentivized to force clean up the area in that in that place where they're installing that new structure.
But so maybe if you went to a nearby city and asked them, how has the homelessness changed?
They're like, it's tripled in the last 2 months.
Yeah, they're like, there's so many people.
Right. Well, like Steve was saying, they don't disappear. You don't clean up a camp and then they're gone. Like they migrate. They just go somewhere else. So yeah. Can we just say, oh, sorry.
No, you're gonna say exactly what I'm gonna say.
I just want to touch on what an empathetic, amazing person he is. Like it seems like, again, like the more people we talk to, if he wanted to be just an asshole and go into these camps and force everybody out, and do it with authority and like just drive that hammer down, he could do that. Like that is his, the job has certain, there's certain duties within the position, but it really comes back to human, like people making decisions to be empathetic or not, and it's amazing how many people we meet who are in these roles where they could very easily maybe like degrade people, or maybe make people uncomfortable,
take advantage of their power.
Yeah, force them into a box that they don't want to be in. And yet time and again, we're meeting people who are choosing to use their authority in ways that kind of make people feel seen in that moment,
and very compassionate,
feel a little better. Yeah.
And one of the things that he said that I thought was like a bit like a lightning bolt going off in my brain was like about the assumption of trauma between first responders in that first 10 years. Like, you kind of know that, but that's like kind of also crazy that like it's just assumed you're gonna have PTSD within a decade of doing this work. Like, that's
it makes total sense too with the things that they see every day. And I don't think he said it on this call, but the jaded, I think he referred to himself as a jaded asshole, and that's what his wife referred to him as.
That was on this one. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that was this one? Okay. Yeah. Good for him. Good for him for recognizing that, making those updates and changes.
Sticking with it,
not an easy job.
Staying in this career, staying with, like, he didn't, say, oh, this is damaging me in my relationship. And then
it was at one time, I think.
Well, it does sound like it was, but it seems like the way that he confronted that realization once he realized that was happening, maybe with his wife's help of pointing it out, he didn't just jump ship and say, well, then I can't do this job anymore. Mm-hmm. I can't manage having a family and being a good, husband and being good to myself and have
he didn't
this
sacrifice
role.
The job for that.
Right.
Yeah.
He figured it out, and that takes so much strength and so much bravery and so much humility to be able to come on to, a public forum and admit that, and say, like, yeah, I was getting jaded and, I was angry and I wasn't being a good family member. But sticking with all of those things and overcoming all of those hurdles. And now I'm sure you can tell just by talking to him, he's probably an amazing family member. Seems like amazing at his job, in the sense of like his metric of success is like making somebody feel a little bit better about themselves that day, versus so like beautiful. How many people did I institutionalize today or something,
seriously.
Definitely.
Yeah. We need more people like him out there. And I think there are and I think we're going to meet a lot of them.
Yeah, I'm hoping.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then zooming out of the trauma thing within first responders and tying that to the trauma between people experiencing homelessness.
Exactly.
I mean, that's really interesting that two sides, I'm simplifying that obviously, but like two sides of this issue, and they're all traumatized. They've all been through stuff.
You're entering into a world of this negative space, this heavy vibration, if you will, this very low vibration that exists in those encampments, in those areas, in some of those communities where like sex trafficking is going on and drug use is going on and abuse is going on. And I imagine like you have people on meth, that means people are just probably rambling on about their problems. And just, I mean, imagine being in that environment, and recognizing that the responders are going to definitely have PTSD, within 10 years, just is like a testament to like the people who are also there for 24 hours a day, every single day, what struggles they're up against as well.
And the fact, like we touched on, the fact that people experiencing everything you just described and still prefer that to what's behind the other door.
Right.
I mean, like.
But that's the thing. I don't think it's they prefer it. I think that they're not thinking soundly. And so.
In the moment they prefer it.
Yeah,
yes, you're right. Obviously, with a clear perspective, they would likely make different choices. But in that moment, that feels like the right choice.
And like what Steve was saying too, is like you can't really pin there's the they. I mean, the they is a bunch of individuals, right?
Yeah,
so there's a million different reasons why maybe where some people are like very much afraid on what's the other side of the door. There are probably a lot of people who have actually had very negative experiences in social service programs or something, or like there's so many reasons why somebody might not take that help when it's offered
or
to
from
them.
Police officers, because Steve said while Steve's great, he mentioned another county that they behave completely differently. So just like we shouldn't treat each homeless person as though you had one negative interaction with a homeless person, so sweeping generalizations that they're all going to act this way. Same thing about police officers. If you had a bad police officer interaction, there's lots of Steves out there too.
Sure. Or the influence. I mean, if you're around, we're very influenced by our community. And if we happen to be in a space where maybe we're young, maybe we're impressionable, maybe we haven't really lived this lifestyle for that long, and maybe our elders around us are saying like, oh no, man, you don't want to go there. Oh man, you don't want to take their services. That's how they get you. Or like, like kind of like feeding that. And then you're like, now you're like unnecessarily afraid of the service of the programs being offered to you, and it's just it's just fear-based, fear-based decision making.
Yeah.
I remember that one quote he said about connection is the opposite of addiction. I like that one.
That was really, really
can
interesting.
Be so isolating. And I was so glad he brought up Gabor Mate. I don't know how you say his name exactly, but I have seen countless of his speeches and stuff on YouTube and his interviews. And he really is worth watching. He's an addiction expert. He's 83 years old. And I think he's been doing addiction counseling. It seems like his whole career.
Wow.
I mean, he's fascinating. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he's captivating.
Really, that was there's so many things circling in my brain. Like the idea that like the different drugs, like that alcohol's not a thing. I don't know why that's like just so strange. Like they just don't find alcohol bottles. That just isn't a problem. That's really interesting. That like thinking about the whole like the chicken or the egg situation with drug addiction, which one comes first. Yeah, it was just a really insightful conversation. I'm so grateful that he took the time to talk to us and to put himself in that like vulnerable situation to discuss what he's seen over the last, 2.5 decades of doing this kind of work. All right, guys. Well, this was an awesome episode. Thank you for joining us, listening to this today. We hope you guys learned a lot. And we're hoping that Steve joins our Facebook page and our group, and you guys can ask him the questions that you might have. Saturday night, you guys go have fun.
Thank you.
All right. Night, everybody.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thanks for listening to Unpacking Homelessness. This episode was produced and edited by us. Our theme song is by Eric Lawson. You can find more of his music at soundcloud.com/eelaws. If you or someone you know would like to contribute to our show, get in touch with us at unpackinghomelessness@gmail.com. Until next time.